Yes, it's working. Great. I'm sorry for the delay because we just came from a side event about military missions, and I feel very sorry that we had to give up that very cool area over there. But at least we can sit very close to the ventilator. So we have a 60-minute side event, and it's all about national carbon budgets and how using carbon budgets also to shape sectorial pathways to a net zero world. So what we're going to do is I'll start with a round of questions to our panelists. I will then also introduce them, and I also understood that some of you will have slides to show. So I'll start with Professor Pірс Форстер. He is a member of the UK Climate Change Committee, director of the Priestley Centre for Climate Futures, and professor of physical climate change at the University of Leeds. Yeah, the question I'm going to ask is, on the global level, the carbon budget shows us, the remaining budget to limit the global warming in line for the Paris Agreement, and a similar, approach can be used for at a country level to define, what is still remaining in terms of carbon emissions. This year, the UK Change Committee, yeah. Yeah. This is the first question. Oh, we have to start with this one. Oh, sorry, I'm.
Fine.
Yeah, sorry. You're off to for a while. We'll start with Professor Steven Sitch, Global Project Manager. Apologies for this. Professor in the Physical Geography at the University of Ексетера. And the question I have to the gentleman is the Global Carbon Budget project has over 100 contributors from many organizations, and was founded to track trends in global carbon emissions and sinks, as well as the progress towards reaching the Paris Agreement. Could you please update us on recent findings from the Global Carbon Budget project, and what is actually the remaining budget to limit global warming to 1.5 ideally, or 2 degrees, and what does that mean for national policies?
Does that work? Perfect. Okay, yes, so I'll briefly present the Global Carbon Budget 2025, which we released yesterday. Could I change slide? Okay, so yeah, this is a massive undertaking. It's the 20th edition, actually. It's a bottom-up exercise. We have just over 130 scientists from 100 organizations and 21 countries. Okay, so in a nutshell, what we do is each year we update the changes in the global carbon cycle. What we see here, we essentially update the 5 main components of the carbon cycle. We have in the grey arrow, the large grey arrow, which is about 36 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. They're the emissions from fossil fuel. We have in yellow the net emissions from land use change. So they are the 2 emissions into the atmosphere. Then on average, about 50% of that CO2 remains in the atmosphere, causing climate change. The other 50% approximately goes into 2 terms. The green here is the natural land sink, and the blue is the ocean sink. Okay, so this graphic here is made for 2015 to 2024, but in fact we have data from 1850, and each of these components are independently estimated. Okay, so key highlights for 2025. So we'll start with the fossil CO2 emissions. So what we see here is the emissions changing from 1960 to the present day. It's roughly a sort of straight line upwards. You see these small sort of decreases, and they're linked to actually major social economic events. So the last being the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you see, these massive sort of financial crisis COVID events only have a small blip on the fossil emissions. We really need to decarbonize to cut the link between GDP and fossil emissions. Okay, so the main result from 2025 is that we see a 1.1% increase in fossil fuel for 2025, and coincidentally, that's the same as the 2024 value, and in comparison, that compares to 0.8% per year over the last decade, 2015 to 2024. So it's not a good message. We're still increasing fossil fuel in the atmosphere compared to the previous decade, 2005 to 2014, which was at 2% per year. It's less, so some good news. The other thing which is good news, actually, there's 35 economies which have reduced emissions while at the same time increased their economies, and they represent 25% of global emissions. So there is some progress here. Okay, so now the second component is the land use emissions. So this is the left-hand side here shows the net land use emissions through time, and essentially they've been decreasing. So we project 4.1 billion tons in 2025, but there's a large uncertainty around that value. Now, on the right-hand side, as I said, this was the net land use flux, and that has various components. Put simply, you have the lighter colors. You see something linked in the tropics to what we call rotating agriculture or shifting cultivation, where essentially on a local scale, the farmer will be deforesting, but then reforesting nearby. So that's roughly carbon neutral. The terms we're really interested in are the darker colors. You see in red, you see permanent deforestation, and in green, you see afforestation and restoration. And that really are two big levers on the land for nature-based solutions. So we need to reduce the deforestation while at the same time increase the afforestation, reforestation. And just in terms of numbers, the permanent deforestation is roughly double the reforestation. The deforestation is typically happening in the tropics, the reforestation in the temperate zones like China, Europe, etc. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so that's what we see here. We see the three main culprits for the net land use flux. So in Europe and North America, of course, we deforested 100, 200 years ago. Now we're starting to reforest. The example here is with China. So you have removals from the land use sector. 60% of the net land use emissions are from three tropical countries, Brazil, Indonesia, and Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay, so to put that on the map, you can see here, you can see it's the red represents the emissions from land use, net land use to the atmosphere. As I say, it's the tropical countries. And then you see the blue colors represent the areas which have seen net removals to the land, and that's China and Europe, as I mentioned, a bit in North America as well. Okay, so those two terms are the emissions to the atmosphere. And what about the fates of those emissions? So we'll first start with the carbon sinks. So what you see on the left-hand side is you see the land carbon sink and how it's evolving through time. And on the right-hand side, you see the oceans. And essentially, you have sinks in both. And we have a slightly new methodology this year to calculate the sinks. About 21% of our total emissions are taken up by the land and 29% by the oceans. Notably, what you see is a lot of variability from year to year in the land sink, and that's associated with climate variability, so droughts, heat waves, etc. And particularly this example, 23 and 2024 was an El Nino year. You typically have drought conditions in tropical forests, lower productivity, more fires, etc. We also in Canada in 2023 had massive fires. I think it was emitting 0.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide in that year, which is equivalent of some countries. Okay, we understand what's going on there. For the oceans, it's a physical, biological process. For the land, it's a biological process. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this I think is particularly interesting and relevant here is you have the sink through time in the land. Actually, it's vulnerable to climate change itself. So we really want to have limit the climate change because we want to protect our sinks. So, you know, we're here in the Amazon, etc., and you see the dark red color, and the tropical forests are particularly vulnerable to extra warming because they're already at their temperature optimum for things like productivity. Also, during this decadal period, we had 2 El Ninos, which caused drought and extra fires. But also, you can see some interesting dynamics in the temperate and boreal. Typically warming in the long, but at the same time, that warming stimulates microbial respiration, so potentially you lose some of your soil carbon as well. So I think that's going to be a challenge to manage the soils in the future under warming conditions. So just to highlight, essentially, is over the last decade, the land sink has reduced by 25% because of climate change. It should have been a quarter bigger than it was. Similarly, the ocean is reduced by 7%, and that's simply a gas is less soluble in water when you increase temperature. So CO2, any gas. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this comes on to the remaining carbon budget. So Piers also works in this sort of area. And so essentially you can run the climate or Earth system models, and you can tell the results from these models can tell you what's the total amount of CO2 you can emit until you reach certain climate targets, 1.5, 1.7, 2 degrees. The GCB will tell you how much you've already used of that. So the difference is the remaining budget. So next slide. So that's shown here on the left-hand side. So you can see here for 1.5 degrees, we've virtually exhausted our carbon. So we've only got left 170 billion tons before we reach the 1.5 degree target. So as I first mentioned in the first slide, we emit each year 40 approximately to the atmosphere. So 170 divided by 40 is approximately 4 years. So for 1.5 degrees, we've got approximately 4 years budget left. And then if you look at 1.7 degrees and 2 degrees, it translates to 12 years and 25 years respectively at current CO2 levels. But of course, we hope to bend the curve. So you've got slightly longer, but the right-hand side really just shows you what we need to do. And you know, we haven't bent the curve yet on the emissions, but I think it's a phenomenal effort we're going to need to do to bring these targets down. As I say, 1.4 degrees is 1.5 degrees is you know, almost exhausted, but you know, every 10th of a degree counts. So we really need to drop these CO2 levels. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting to see, and I'm always pleased to see some presentations with real numbers and sort of real thinking. Just before we move on, a small question. You're showing remaining budget in CO2 owned, not in CO2 equivalent. Is that correct? Or
yes. So we'd have to adjust for them.
okay. Good. So now we are going to Sir Pірс Форстер. So I'll repeat again. So which at the global level, the remaining budget to limit global warming within the Paris Agreement, very difficult to achieve. You know, you can use a similar course on national level. Do you hear me well? Because my thing is interrupted all the time. Yeah. So in the UK, we're talking about you know, the UK issued the climate change committee issued the 7th carbon budget to the UK government. Yeah, can you please tell us more about how this developed and the role of different stakeholders in this process? But, you know, impacting the pace of carbon reduction, how they are introducing new climate policies and drive investments in low carbon transition.
Sure, I can, but you give me the microphone. Yeah, okay, I can, but you have to give me your microphone. Yeah, okay, so I also have the slide too. But yes, thank you very much. But I want to say that I'm quite unprepared with my slides, so I'm going to have to tell you to kind of jump, okay? Going to give you, going to go to slide 10 and we're going to go back to slide 4. So this is the good slide to start on. So yes, so I'm going to talk about our work on the UK Climate Change Committee. And what it tries to do, we try and translate what we're trying to do nationally, what we want to do in a particular country. So we just have even science, yes, and from the science, we then have to go to the COP negotiations, and the COP negotiations trying to get countries to end these pleas. But what we're interested in then is really what we do to translate from the NDC commitments down to what we can do for particular countries. Okay, could you go to slide number 3 now? Okay, no, 4.1. Yeah. Okay. Say is a really good way to do it is change sorts, and we set up the first one in the UK. We set up the first one in the UK in 2008, but there is now a really good strong collaborative network of these independent climate councils that are working in different countries, and it's fantastic that we do have a climate council in Ukraine, and I think you're doing a tremendous job. So congratulations for your work. But I'm going to talk a bit about exactly what we're doing at the Climate Change Committee. So could you go on to the next slide, please? Now, slide 5. Yes, this is good. So, okay, so our committee was established a long time ago, and what we try and do, we try and set advice on this thing back in 2008 we call carbon budgets. But the carbon budget that I talk about are a completely different concept than the one that Stephen is talking about. So it's quite confusing. But I want to say that he got ours in first, okay? So it's your fault that they're called carbon budgets. But so what our carbon budget is in fact a 5-year average emission target of 5 years for CO2 equivalents. And what they try to do is drive us into a target towards our net zero commitment. Could you go on, please? No, on. Good, please. Okay. So what this picture is of these 5-year carbon budgets that has been set by our committee. and the whole point of the budget is really drive business investment and really drive change toward that net zero target. Sorry, these sounds keep coming in and out. I'll try my best. Just keep it really near me. Okay. So we have the interim target, kind of net zero commitment. Because we've been doing a long time, we have evidence that these really work. So if you have a look at the kind of pace of emission reduction in the UK, and we've already reduced our emissions by over 50%. And the exciting thing is this: we've had the carbon budgets. The pace of change has doubled. So we're reducing emissions by about 4 or 5% annually currently. So really encouraging that this process does really deliver. And come to speak to your point, in fact. So what we find it works because we get these consistent kind of policies, and the good thing about them, these kind of policies do come from different political constitutions. They all, because of the carbon budget, become these legally binding commitments for our country. They really drive long-term direction and long-term changes. So, and the other thing is they really drive the business confidence to make the necessary investments. No, that's fine. No, could you go back? Could you go back one? Yeah, could you now go on one more? Yeah. So this publication we just produced is our 7th carbon budget publication, and what it does is try and set that 2040 climate commitment, and that was also the same kind of trajectory. We did show the government to really try and prove to the government that this climate budget would be deliverable. So we spend a lot of time talking to the government to really look at each different sector of the economy. We go into detail to see how that could change, and we try and compare to the best evidence from different countries. So we try and convince them it really works, and particularly we look at the economics. So we try and look what are the best economics to really drive the change. And it really was this trajectory that convinced when I wrote to Kirk and Starmer to set our NDC advice. So that advice did come from this carbon budget trajectory. So I presented it to the kind of government, and I really said to them that this kind of 81% NDC target for the 2035 commitment is really deliverable. So I had to sit down with the Treasury to really show them the economics and that it was possible to do and possible in a way that was good for our economy. So it's set, but of course we have to now deliver. We now have to deliver it.
But so far, as I can see, you've managed to deliver on previous ones.
Well, that's quite a kind of subtle difference now, but because the previous budget to date was set for kind of 80% reduction target, the very last budget was set to the net zero target. So it's more difficult to deliver, but we absolutely think we will. And if you want one more slide then to answer this question, it's good to go on to slide 18, please. This is all part of the fun, part of the journey through my slide deck. More. Yeah, good. Yeah, okay. So what we try and do as well as a committee is to track how well the government is delivering. So this is the two bar graphs in the center to show our prediction for the 2030 NDC target and the 2035 NDC, and the green and the kind of yellow kind of colors to indicate where we think the kind of policies are really delivering, but the red and orange one really where we think they aren't working. So what we do then, we just say to the government then, okay, you have to bring in additional policies to try and make up for where you aren't delivering.
Okay, but I guess that's also not surprising because, you know, the low-hanging fruit basically has been picked, and now we're working on, you know, the last 20%, which is, you know, the hardest to, in the hard to abate sector.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So if you do have a look at where the red colors come from, they come from things like carbon capture and storage technologies, and these sort of things are more difficult to get working.
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. This was very insightful to have a country perspective, and I think in that sense, UK, you know, I even believe, if I'm correct, that you're one of the few countries we have an NDC which is 1.5 compatible.
Just and it sort of depends on what you count for that.
Yeah.
It is sort of 1.5 compatible, but it isn't completely. But the whole point is that we do think it is a very ambitious target, the most ambitious target possible for our country, that it's actually deliverable.
Yeah, fantastic. I think people from the EU can learn from that. So thank you very much for this. And now I would like to move to Gianpiero Nacci, Managing Director of Climate Strategies and Delivery at EBRD. And of course, I have a question prepared as well. So meeting carbon budgets to reach you know, carbon neutrality or the pathway to it does require large-scale investments, and probably these kind of which are colored red or orange in the UK example. And a lot of this investment will have to come from private capital as well. The state can't do it all. Well, the EBRD is the largest institutional investor in Ukraine, and you've invested a lot also during, you know, with the war that's already ongoing almost 4 years now, with investing, with the aim in investing 1.5 to 2 billion euro per year. So when we're talking about green financing, is there any room for that, or is it mainly, you know, focusing on keeping the economy afloat? Yeah, and how does the EBRD does it in, you know, balancing the immediate needs of Ukraine and also then looking into the green recovery? Yeah.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the presentation we just seen, because they provide a sobering reflection on where we are, but also, you know, the importance of policy drivers, you know, the policy signals so important for the financial community. And I guess, and then I go to your question, you know, we see the role of MDB is a bit like trying to translate, you know, we're a bit in between, right? The science, the policy, and you know, and the private sector in the case of the EBRD, or in general the investments. And this sort of trying to come up with a coherent approach is particularly complex, and maybe I can give a couple of examples later. Now, going back to your question, let me start by saying that at EBRD, you know, Ukraine is very central in our mandate. It's a country that we've been operating for over 30 years. It's in our DNA, so, you know, clearly what we are doing is very much part of our mission. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, we've been very focused on support the Ukrainian economy is going. Ultimately, without trying to stabilize and perhaps grow the economic output, is very difficult to not only support the interventions needed to address the disruption, the destructions caused by the war, but also, to create economic activity for people. So that has been our priority. And in this context, indeed, we have been quite active in financing all sectors, providing finance to infrastructure to address the destruction caused by the invasion, but also by the war. But also we've been operating at different levels in the corporate sector and also through local financial intermediaries. Maybe and in all this context, there's been always a constant ongoing dialogue on the features, on the criteria for these interventions and these investments. And I must say that from the Ukrainian authorities, there's always been a significant attention to maintain, to stay the course and to continue in a way to adhere to the objectives set up in the climate policies, in the energy strategies. So, and the second is also to, while addressing the issues caused by the war, at the same time preparing for the future. And so looking into sustainability in the energy sector, looking at sustainability in farming, looking at efficient logistics. So in this context, the direction of travel hasn't changed. Clearly, the means to get to the end results needs to take into account the war situation, but the ambition, the aspiration, the direction of travel, I don't think has changed. On the contrary, we see a very significant effort to plan for the future and to include green considerations in the way economic activities are designed and policies are designed. So in this context, I like to perhaps talk about the interventions in the energy sector, because probably are more relevant, both in terms of the distraction, but also in terms of the relevance for economic output. So at EBRD, we've been financing over 3.5 billion euro in the last since the war, since the full-scale invasion. Mostly our loan, but also we've been able to mobilize grants from international donors, particularly the EU. And the focus has been on all components of the energy sector, from working capital to purchase natural gas, to keep the power plants running, to interventions to address the disruption, so new capacity brought in the system to fulfill at least partially the destroyed capacity, but also interventions on reducing reliance on fossil fuel imports and increasing resilience of the whole energy system, like interventions in the grid to stabilize, improve, modernize the grid, and crucially in renewable energy. So renewable energy, of course, is an area where Ukraine has a lot of potential, and we are, but at the same time, there are some policy or regulatory gaps that needs to be addressed. In the first place, there is a limited availability of long-term offtake energy. Make ability of renewable energy complex, difficult. At the same time, also the price signals are not stable. There is an element of volatility in the energy price, and there is an element of also regulatory environment is not conducive to long-term investment. That's something that we're trying to address or contribute. And in this respect, there is an interesting, I believe, program we're working on together with the World Bank and the IFC, which is called Ramp Up, as the new name, but it is a risk mitigation mechanism that utilize funding from the European Union to stabilize, to create an incentive for investors in renewable energy. So stabilize the price and allows banks like EBRD, but also in time the private sector to basically provide finance for the medium and long term, but also create interest in interesting environment for investor, renewable energy developers to come into the market and invest in renewable energy capacity. So this program has the aspiration to finance 1 gigawatt of renewable energy, and we are in the process of finalizing the mechanisms. But in order, though, to create long-term policy signal and a stable regulatory environment, for example, also facilitating, private to private offtake agreements. Clearly, we need also to work on the policy side. So create the capacity in the country to issue renewable energy auctions, looking at the flexibility in the system, and also trying to address the bottleneck. Maybe the last part to address your question. I talked about, the appetite from investor. I talked about the policy, but we see in the real economy that, there is still a strong appetite for green investments. We've seen this in the context of, many corporates, particularly in the food and agriculture sector, which is, of course, a major source of export and income for the country. Even last year, at EBRD, we signed a sustainability-linked loan with a startup, which is large vertical integrated agri-food operator, with a strong focus on sustainable farming KPIs, water savings KPIs, and utilization of agricultural residues for energy production. Just to say that, the real economy is still very much, just to answer your question, there is a strong demand for green investment and for green finance. And when it comes to DBRD, we haven't changed any of our, criteria, assessment criteria, or when it comes, for example, to alignment with the objective of the Paris Agreement. Every single project we do, but it's not only DBRD, all MDBs operate more or less under the same sort of circumstances or the same criteria. So we haven't, we're still applying those criteria. We're still applying very stringent environmental protection criteria in the investments we finance. So we can see that the private sector and the public sector are very sensitive and are very they haven't necessarily requested any change in the type of approach we provide to finance.
Hey, yeah, thank you very much. Just a brief question is sort of this appetite to invest in renewable energy. Can we say in Ukraine that because of the war, the appetite has grown because of energy resilience and sort of seeing that dependence on fossil fuel is maybe not such a good thing, or is it simply because the numbers are right to make that investment?
It's both, in fact. Absolutely. Renewable energy, because of its more disseminated sort of nature, clearly increase resilience in the system. But if you look at the declining cost of renewable energy power generation, clearly is very cost competitive. And in fact, if you look at the current price in the market, makes the case for renewable energy certainly very, very interesting. What is missing though is the instruments that address the volatility in the price and long-term offtake agreements. But it is exactly what is the resilience in the energy system and the economic sort of a case for renewable energy investment.
Okay, thank you for that. And now I would like to move for a distinguished speaker from Ukraine, and Mykola Shlapak. He is a climate change and climate policy expert at the Green Transition Office and the Dixie Group. And personally, I work very close together with Mykola on the war emissions, but that's the topic not for today. So question to Mykola is, you are an independent advisory body to the Ministry of, I would have to say now, Economy, Environment and Agriculture of Ukraine. You started to work on sectorial decarbonization studies. I've seen a couple of them and I think they're really interesting and well done. You're planning to develop this national carbon budget in line, I guess, with what UK is doing. So why do you think that should be a priority for Ukraine, particularly because it's at war? And what are your first results and most significant challenges you see coming ahead? Mykola.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of climate policy, Ukraine will face actually like the unique challenge in the next decade, because it's basically not about the GHG emission reductions per se, but about the low carbon and climate resilient development and recovery. During the 3 years of war, emissions decreased by 32% compared to 2021, and as of 2023, they were actually at the level of 24% from 1990. So this translates into 76% reductions compared to the 1990. At the same time, according to the latest RDNA assessment, economic investment into economic recovery and reconstruction already by the end of last year exceeded 500 billion euro. So this scale of investment will inevitably result in growing GHG emissions. And the scale of this and the level of emissions on the national level will rebound. And the scale of this rebound will depend on the investment and policy decisions being made now and in the next couple of years. That's why so Ukraine would need to a clear understanding on the current level of emissions, but also on the future level of emissions to manage this transition to low carbon and green development. Ukraine's recent NDC submitted just a couple of days ago foresees a target of more than 65% reduction compared to 1990. This means that actually the difference between current emissions levels and this NDC target is about 99 million tons. But at the same time, Ukraine is also working actively on EU accession process. And this means that at some point, Ukraine will need to accelerate the decarbonization effort to meet the EU, our future joint targets of Ukraine and EU. EU also recently adopted and submitted its NDC, which has the indicative range of 66.25, 72.5. So there is higher reduction levels, and also this would the clear understanding of the structure of emissions would be required for implementation of EU legislation into national legislation, and also amendments of the EU regulations that cover some sectors of emissions, such as effort sharing regulation. So in any case, Ukraine would need very detailed information about the developing level of emissions for each sector. That's why we started our work on sectoral decarbonization studies. Next slide. And also, even if you're looking about on the final destination, this climate neutrality target for 2050, there could be very different scenarios how to reach it and how to balance total GHG emissions and total removals. So it's also subject to policy and investment decisions how Ukraine would reach climate neutrality, and for this we would need sectoral decarbonization studies and the national carbon budget. Next, please. So that's why our approach to developing sectoral decarbonization studies and national carbon budget could be divided in 3 steps. So first, we look into each key sector of Ukrainian economy which has significant emissions, and develop sectoral decarbonization studies for such sectors, including with the focus on cost effectiveness of mitigation measures and estimating marginal abatement costs for each technology in the sector. And the second step is developing the marginal abatement cost curve for Ukrainian economy as a whole based on those individual sectoral studies, and clustering the mitigation measures based on cost effectiveness to link potentially with different sources of financing available. And the final step is the development of carbon budget for midterm period, for instance, for 2030, 2035, based on defined already mitigation potential, policies and costs, and regular updates of such carbon budgets. So we are inspired here by the work UK Climate Change Committee is doing, and fantastic reports they are producing for policymakers, but also for businesses and other stakeholders. And this is just the example of the marginal abatement cost we developed for the agriculture sector, because this was our first decarbonization, sectoral decarbonization study prepared this year.
Thank you, and it's impressive to see that despite the war going on, that you are doing this fantastic work on budgeting. Maybe a tough question. Very much on any scenario that you develop in Ukraine, whether it's CO2 emissions or economy, is about when and how the war will end. And particularly, or one of the questions, how many of the refugees will return back to their country? How do you model this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the important and challenging part. And for the initial studies, we are looking into like potential of emission reduction. So we are analyzing in depth the drivers of emission in the sectors historically and like on the this like economic and technical perspective by the mid of the century. But this second step of defining pathway, how to reach from the current level to that potential, this would require additional clarity on the like how the war will end and when. And this would be on the stage where we'll be developing the national carbon budget. We will develop this pathway for each sector from the current level to the like climate neutrality level. So defining the adoption rates, the speed of implementation for different technologies, and also taking into account this like macroeconomic context after the war.
Thank you for that. Actually, I do have a second round of questions, and I would like to ask all panelists maybe to take their places. But before I do my round, I first would like to ask anyone in the audience whether he or she has anything to ask to the panelists. In the meantime, if not, then I'll go back to Professor Steven Sitch, and I don't know if they were shared with you beforehand, because this is a tough one. And it's about Ukraine and as an agricultural powerhouse, and they are using less organic fertilizers, and also changes to the crop structure. The category of cropland in the national inventory switched from being a sink to a source of carbon emissions due to soil organic carbon loss. This trend obviously needs to be reversed to achieve this climate neutrality, as Nicola also shown. From your global research, what's the role of LULUCF sector and specifically land-based removals in achieving the Paris Agreement goals? And can Ukraine rely on land sinks as a significant source of removals in the next decades?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was interested in your last slide because you had the tillage no-till box there. So I was wondering, yes, with climate change, so with the warming, microbial respirations and exponential function. It's an exponential function of temperature, so they're going to be vulnerable if you've got big stocks of carbon in soils in mid-latitudes. So Ukraine's potentially vulnerable. So it doesn't surprise me it goes from a sink to a source. But there are management ways to try to protect those sources. I was wondering things like tillage, no tillage. There's also biochar to try to enhance change the soil textures, etc. So I mean, I'm not an expert on Ukraine, but I'd imagine there are challenges, but there are also some management approaches which could help. And then I didn't see, with regard to reforestation, did you have a bar in there? Okay.
Then a question to Professor Pірс Форстер.
Thank you.
You know, so one of the important challenges in developing those national carbon budget is translation of the potential of the decarbonization technologies into sectorial pathways, and that includes judgments on adoption rate, cost reduction, competition between technologies, and dealing with uncertainties, as always. How are these challenges assessed in the UK carbon budget, and what would be the key technologies that would drive net zero transition in the UK, and their contribution to the carbon budget target achieved?
Okay, well, that's a fantastic question. The first thing is we have a wonderful team of people that work for us. So we have kind of 50 of these very intelligent analysts that do work for the committee. And we have lots of expertise on the committee as well. Then we produce very detailed modeling for each different sector of the economy, but it isn't just modeling. We do lots of consultation with different stakeholders. We do also look at the literature really carefully. We also talk to technological experts. We also talk to policy design experts. And I think one of the key brand new things we do, we have these kind of citizen panels as well, where we talk to members of the kind of public and things about how much they would be prepared to change and alter their behaviors and things. And the other thing we did this time, we did a really careful kind of cost benefit analysis as well, to really try and look at these. We do have these kind of marginal abatement curves that you show, but we also have the technological S curves that we really try and think how well we could push things. And the other innovation we did this time was to really try and compare to some of the best countries in the world. For example, the kind of role of for example, we compared to the Netherlands to try and see what might be achievable. And we do that two different ways. We first do that to show the kind of modeling and make that work effectively, but we also do it to convince the politicians that these sort of things are really actually deliverable. And I ought to say too that we have a really wonderful economist, Stephen Sitch, that really did work for your work for your development bank. So to have the experts on the committee to really try and make sure that our advice to government is really convincing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And then to Giampiero, so you are, or the EBD is working on establishing these country sector platforms to help countries in the mobilizing climate finance and the green transition. How are these policies investment linked to the approach, and actually is there also a room of using this concept of these national carbon budgets in these country sector platforms?
Very much so, as long as they are translated in something that the real economy actors can understand, right? And I can share and also to take into account, look, the financial sector is relatively simplistic in its approach, right? Ultimately, we think in terms of sectors because that's, you know, easy way or easier way to look at risks. So, and in fact, you know, one of the problems is that we struggle to a more systemic thinking in the way risks are assessed, pricing is determined, and so that's one of the challenge we have in the financial sector. But at the same time, to answer your question, absolutely, you know, and I can give you an example, not at the moment about Ukraine, but the example of Turkey, because we've been working with the Ministry of Industry for quite some time in trying to to develop solutions for helping decarbonizing the industrial sector. And in the case of Turkey, of course, there was a big political economy driver, which is the forthcoming CBAM regulation, that of course has a lot of implication in the competitiveness of the Ukrainian industry. The Turkish industry. So the Ministry of Industry asked us support to work on sectoral decarbonization pathways for cement, steel, aluminium, and nitrogen fertilizers. And we, of course, is not work we've done directly with using consultants to indeed look at the trying to link the national climate policy. Turkey has a 2053 carbon neutrality objective, and try to translate that commitment to sectoral pathways. And the work has been informed by the science, but you know, has been based on a lot of bottom-up engagement with the sector associations, with industrial companies, but also with the technology providers to try to, you know, find an alignment, a convergence towards the technology solutions that can deliver this result. And I think this has been a incredibly interesting but also complex engagement, because particularly trying to match the expectations in terms of increasing output of the sector versus the realistic, you know, market dynamics, because that's one of the problems in thinking in terms of sectors. You miss out on the interdependencies between sectors, between, you know, broader elements of the real economy, the international trade. So that is you know very well the complexity of bringing these elements together. But at least the convergence of the technological solutions, that was key to identify the type of investment needed. And then, since we brought the financial sector in the conversation from the very beginning, you know, trying to start identifying the financial solutions. And all of a sudden, based on these multiple elements, the policy, the technology, the sector association, you know, investment plans, these are highly cyclical sectors that are difficult to decarbonize because they, you know, they are highly capital intensive, and so often companies don't have the balance sheet to finance, you know, high capital intensive intervention. But all of these ultimately almost naturally converging to, you know, trying to bring together these elements into a country platform. And then, in fact, what we've been doing, we managed to also bring together other IFIs, the World Bank, the IFC. So this plan has been announced and hopefully will become operational next year. But again, it's this combination of different elements that gives the policy signals, but also I would like to stress the engagement of all the parties. You know, because if it is a top-down approach, if it's only driven by policy, it's very difficult then to drive implementation and also to get the private sector and the financial sector involved.
Yeah, and I just thinking of, you know, because you gave the example of Turkey, and in that sense, you know, we were just talking about the cement industry, for example, which, you know, Ukraine is facing this enormous reconstruction challenge. Turkey, you know, after the earthquake, has and is still rebuilding, you know, that part of the country that was heavily destroyed. So I guess they're also, and it's not part of EU, so CBAM, you know, if no accession, then CBAM could also hit, you know, that same industry.
And, but there are also historical links in the steel industry, for example. You know, Turkey has been an, you know, net importer from Ukraine, particularly of slabs, you know, and that we reprocessed in the Turkish electrical furnaces, you know, segment of the steel industry. So these links have been there. There are historical commercial links, very well established.
No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Then last question to Mikla. So what's the current focus on your sectorial decarbonization studies? And actually, so when will be the national carbon budget ready for Ukraine?
Yeah, so so far we did two sectoral studies, one for the agricultural sector and the other for the cement manufacturing sector. And now we started to work on two new studies. One is focused on waste sector, but waste in a broad context covering both solid waste management and wastewater management. And also starting work on the iron and steel sector. So we would need some time to prepare these studies and additional studies for remaining most significant carbon intensive sector, in particular energy sector, because it impacts like transition in other sectors such as like buildings or transport. And then we will start work on the national carbon budget. We actually plan to start work on the methodological part, on the approach to the national carbon budget next year. So I hope in 2 or 3 years we will have the first national carbon budget, and then it will be regularly updated, because we also kind of learning in the process. We are trying to evolve and develop the approach we use for the sectoral studies in each next study. So similarly, for the national carbon budget, it will be evolving process, and in particular, this like stakeholder engagement and linking to the specific investment project and businesses is one of the like priorities where we want to strengthen this part, so to strengthen the links between the strategic sectoral studies and specific investment projects on the ground in Ukraine.
Okay, very ambitious, very challenging to do. We are already running a bit over time, but I nobody was running away, so I think it was interesting enough. I see a question there.
So my question is on Ukraine, so probably to Mykola, but if anyone else has thoughts, then obviously, of course, welcome. So I was wondering, what's your estimate on where currently Ukraine is in terms of putting in place the necessary policy framework to ensure or to stimulate the sustainable green recovery after the war is over? So obviously there will be an increase in emissions when it's over, but at least to make sure that it's not too steep an increase. Appreciate the question in general, so maybe you can highlight some major gaps or where you anticipate some success in the near future. So any thoughts there? Thank you.
Thanks, Darina. Yeah, so I would say it's like maybe initial but progressing stage. So in particular, there are some examples. We within the Green Transition Office work on the incorporation of climate and environmental considerations into public investment management reform. We based our approach on the EU taxonomy and 6 environmental and climate goals, but of course we are not requiring like compliance with the alignment with the EU taxonomy and all the technical screening criteria, but at least considerations of all 6 goals to some extent, and referring to the not significant harm principles. That's one example. Also, Ukraine is exploring opportunities to attract different types of climate finance, including via carbon markets. But for this, again, we need some regulations to put in place to govern the approval of the projects and issuance of ITMOs and making corresponding adjustment, etc. So I would say that the government is working in this area, but there is still a lot of work to be done.
No, I want to commend the work of the Green Transition team because what's happening as well, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there is also a lot of interest, international interest in supporting Ukraine with technical assistance, with policy advisory. That's very important, but it's important to have some harmonization and consistency. So I think the work you're doing to try to bring this consistency is very, very important, because the last thing you want is to have a proliferation of multiple standards. Institution that is coming with their own criteria. In the context of development, so these are motivation is super critical, not only because it helps give clear signal to the market, but also because reduce asymmetries in the way investments are designed, finance is provided. So I like to commend your work there because it's super important.
Yeah, of course, I don't know about Ukrainian kind of policies at all, because I haven't been to Ukraine. I absolutely would really love to go and have a look at your country, but despite what I'm not knowing what the policies are, I really know what they need to deliver, because I do think there are a lot of kind of similarities between the way the green transition should go between lots of different countries. And the first thing is you need to decarbonize your electricity production. I mean, and that's obvious. So you need to really build out your renewable and low carbon kind of energy. And the other thing you need to do is you need to electrify as much as possible. So you need to electrify your industry, but also your kind of cars, of course, and you electrify your heating and kind of cooling as much as possible. Yeah. And sort of that transition is really almost exactly the same in every single country. But the attractive thing about that is that it is really a cost-effective transition as well that will ultimately grow your economy. So we do know that kind of renewable energy is much cheaper than other sources of energy now. And we also know, for example, you can go and buy a Chinese electric car that is cheaper than an internal combustion engine car. So that will also drive your economy.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're. Svetlana. Yes.
Well, it's just to say about the decarbonization. So Russians do it pretty effective. I mean, to decarbonize our energy sector, unfortunately. Well, so we will need actually to go with renewables, and it's really very, very good. But actually, my question was everything, all this should be done with people. So people who will do it. So we need to train these people. Do you have any kind of positions for training people to implement it then in Ukraine? I mean, with national carbon budget and with other stuff, so it's really crucial for Ukraine.
Yes, it's absolutely crucial, and that is a big problem in our kind of country as well. So this is where you work with your schools or kind of further educating colleges and your university, but with apprentices and get people in, and people bring your citizen kind of back to Ukraine with the right skills and things like that, and perhaps you ought to come talk to this guy and say, look, this is what we have to do, because a lot of your reconstruction you're doing is not just about providing kind of finance; it's about providing the kind of structural sort of kind of change into organizations kind of within the society to try and make it deliver well.
No, absolutely. It's a super valid point, and it is a key ingredient not only to address the reconstruction phase, but also to, ensure a sustainable future for the country. And what I can say, what DBRD we're doing, but also other multilateral development banks are doing. Of course, we are supporting the institutional capacity. At DBRD, we have a big program to embed experts within the public administration, in different ministries, different level. We always, whenever we deal with the donors community to find the instruments to support financing, there is always a strong emphasis on technical assistance for project preparation, for providing the capacity to implement the project. So this is certainly an important dimension of the work we do. Is it sufficient? Probably not. So we need to come up with solutions that then again provide the long-term sustainability in the system. But maybe the only reassurance I can give you, this is a very in a dimension that is very much central in the way we're trying to structure our interventions and our support.
Okay. That's it. Okay, thank you very much. We come to the end of this side event, and I'd like to ask for a warm applause for our panelists. Thank you.